Do you ever notice how fast the calculation happens? You get another recruiter email, you hear what a colleague negotiated, you read about another reimbursement cut, you look at your own numbers, and before you even realize it, your brain is running the math. Is this even worth it anymore? The hours, the call, the inbox, the liability, the missed dinners, all the pressure. You don't usually say it out loud like that. You say something a lot more familiar, like, I should be making more. For what we deal with, this isn't enough. And if they're going to expect this much, they need to pay for it. And on the surface, that sounds like a compensation conversation. But most of the time, it's not just about the money. Well, hey, everyone, and welcome back to the Better Physician Life podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. Now, today, I want to talk about physician compensation, not the numbers themselves, but what happens when compensation becomes the way you decide if your career is working, when it becomes the actual scoreboard for whether this whole thing is worth it or not. And let's be very clear about this from the beginning. Money matters. Compensation matters. Fair pay matters. This isn't an episode about pretending that it doesn't. You trained for a long time. You took on debt. You delayed earning. You carry risk. Of course, it matters. But at some point in many physicians' careers, compensation stops feeling like pay and starts feeling like proof. Proof that all of this time, effort, and energy was worth it. Proof that you didn't make a mistake. Early on, money feels like validation. You finish your training, you sign your first contract, the number feels big. And it feels like arrival, like confirmation that all those years meant something. And then something shifts. The number might go up, but so does the friction. There's more metrics, more oversight, more portal messages, more expectations, more volume, a lot less margin. And quietly, the internal calculation starts to change. It's no longer, I'm well compensated. And it becomes, is this enough to make this tolerable? And that is a completely different equation. I saw this exact transition in my own career. I wasn't thinking about fulfillment at all. I was thinking about financial independence and escaping medicine and all of the trade offs. If I'm going to be this busy, if I'm going to be this on call, if I'm going to have to deal with all this pressure, then my compensation better reflect it. Now, on the surface, that sounds very reasonable. But what I didn't realize at the time was that I had reduced my entire professional life to a financial equation. Money became the only way to decide if I was doing okay. If the paycheck felt strong, I felt fine. If my RVUs dipped or comparisons crept in, irritation wasn't far behind. And if I was asked to do something at work for free, frustration followed pretty quickly. Not because I'm greedy, but because compensation had become the last remaining scoreboard. When autonomy shrinks, you look for something you can still measure. And when you feel second guessed, or worse, disrespected, you look for something you can point to. Something solid. Something that proves you still matter. And compensation becomes the obvious place. Money is concrete. It's clean. It's numeric. It's objective. Or at least it feels that way. But here's the problem. If compensation becomes the primary metric for whether your career makes sense, you will always feel behind. There is always someone making more than you, with fewer weekends, with less call, with a lighter inbox. The comparison never ends. And even when you win the compensation game, the relief is temporary because the underlying friction is still there. The inbox doesn't disappear because your RVUs went up. The administrative burden doesn't shrink because your base salary increased. So you end up in this loop. If I can just get paid a little more, this will feel better. But it rarely does, not for long at least. And again, this isn't about dismissing the importance of compensation. It's about noticing what you're asking money to solve. Sometimes when physicians say, I should be making more, it seems like a money conversation. But it's usually something more like, if I'm going to be putting up with all of this, they need to pay me more. And underneath all of that is something else. I want more control. I want more say. I want this to feel fair. I want this time for money exchange thing that I'm doing to make sense. That's not about greed and it's not about ego. It's about control. It's about leverage and it's about position. And when those feel thin or maybe even non existent, compensation fills the gap. It becomes the thing you can point to. Because the things you actually care about don't show up on a spreadsheet. Respect, influence, time at home, breathing room. And that's a heavy load for your paycheck to carry. Now, there's another layer to this that comes up all the time when I speak to physicians, especially for male physicians. For a lot of doctors, compensation isn't just professional, it's personal. It's tied to being the provider, the one who carries a lot of financial responsibility at home. And when that compensation number moves, it doesn't feel neutral. It feels destabilizing because the structure you rely on feels less solid. And the responsibility you carry at home suddenly feels heavier. Not because you forgot who you are, but because you've been trained to measure stability in numbers. You were trained to measure performance and to quantify progress. So when the numbers shift, you measure yourself against it. But here's the question I needed to start asking myself. If the money doubled tomorrow, but nothing else changed, would the friction disappear? Would I suddenly feel less rushed, less irritable, more present at home? Or would I just feel better for a week? It's not a trick question. It's meant to separate two things that often get tangled: compensation and alignment. And when those things drift apart, frustration grows. And if you don't notice it clearly, it starts leaking out sideways as sarcasm, as disengagement, as that low grade edge that follows you home. It looks like you're frustrated about money, but most of the time you're frustrated about what you're giving up for the money. Time for income, energy for stability, autonomy for predictability. So, what do you do with that? Not by quitting tomorrow or blowing up your contract, but by getting clear on what actually matters. If money is the only metric, you will chase it indefinitely. If it's just one factor, it stops driving everything. And so sometimes the better question is, what would actually make this feel better besides more money? More control over your schedule, fewer unpaid tasks, clearer inbox boundaries, a different call structure. Sometimes the answer is financial. Sometimes it's structural, and sometimes it's both. But when you lump everything into compensation, you lose leverage because the only solution becomes pay me more. And a lot of the time, that is not fully in your control. What you can control is getting specific. What's actually bothering you? And what part of it can you change? And sometimes the most important shift isn't in the contract. It's in recognizing that your career cannot be reduced to a single number. There's another piece of this I didn't see until I caught it in myself. For a lot of physicians, compensation isn't just about lifestyle. It's about position, trajectory, knowing you're still moving forward. So when your income plateaus or dips, or you intentionally choose a structure that earns less, it feels like you're falling behind, even if you're not. For me, I remember adjusting parts of my schedule and watching the numbers change. I told myself I valued time, that I wanted more margin and white space in my life, and I genuinely did. But when I looked at my paycheck and saw the difference, my chest still tightened. Not because I needed the money to survive, but because I was more attached to the number than I had realized. It had become a signal that I was succeeding, still competitive, still where I was supposed to be. When that number changes, even by choice, it exposes what you've been using it to measure. Of course it does. In this profession, there's always been a number: grades, board scores, percentile, case numbers. So when the numbers move now, of course you measure yourself against them. But something has to give. If you push hard to maximize income, something else usually shrinks. And that something is your time. If you protect your time, income might suffer. That's math. The mistake is thinking you can maximize both forever. Eventually, the math catches up. Every physician is investing in something. Some push hard for income, some protect their time. Neither is wrong. But drifting into one without deciding, that's where resentment starts. And if you calibrate even a little, you're going to feel it. When you open the reconciliation and see your RVUs, when a colleague signs a bigger deal, when you hear what someone else negotiated, that discomfort doesn't automatically mean you chose wrong. It means you changed what you're measuring. And it takes time to get used to that. Here's the part that matters. Compensation is a metric, and it's an important one, but it's still just a metric. When it becomes identity, every slight fluctuation feels personal. When it stays a tool, you can manage it. It doesn't get to manage you. And it's less dramatic than you think. No big announcement, just a different way of keeping score. Before we close, I want to offer something practical. If you've ever walked out of work running mental calculations about productivity or reimbursement and walked into your house still carrying those numbers in your head, you know how quickly it changes the tone at home. That transition matters. So I built the 5-minute commute reset for exactly that moment. Not to make you ignore real financial considerations, but to help you leave the calculations at work. It's short, it fits into a drive you're already taking, and it gives your day a clear stopping point. And you can download it at betterphysicianlife.com/commute reset, and I'll link it in the show notes. Because the goal isn't to stop caring about compensation. It's to make sure it isn't the only thing deciding whether your career is working. Money is a tool, and it's important, and it is real. But when it becomes the only way you decide if you're okay, it starts doing a job it can't do very well. You don't need to pretend money doesn't matter, and you don't need to feel guilty for caring about it. You just get clear on what you're actually trying to fix. Is it income, or is it time, or control, or respect? When you separate those, you have a lot more room to move. And that's where things start to feel different. That's the better physician life. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Better Physician Life podcast.